85. Channel 85. Channel 85. Channel 85.
Good evening. I'm Jim Robertson, managing editor to the Columbia Daily Tribune, and I'm your host tonight for Ask Darwin. And with me is Darwin Hyman, the Columbia mayor. Hello, Mayor Hyman. How are you this evening?
Well, fine, Jim. It's a
Good.
pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm happy to be here to visit with you a while and talk about some issues that the city and you as mayor are facing right now.
Well, it'll be a pleasure to talk to you about it, and to, we hope, maybe get some input from the audience.
That's right, and viewers can call in with your questions at 876-7236. Call in and we'll be happy to address your questions.
And we never know what those questions are going to be, so
Yeah, try to
look
stump Darwin.
Yes.
Well, Mayor, I'm going to start out this evening with ask you to discuss a little bit the recent council meeting and a couple of interesting decisions, issues that came up. The first one being council seating in relation to the city manager.
Well, that's an interesting issue, and I must say that as far as I'm concerned, it is an issue that is probably of not much significance to most of the community. And I almost find it a little bit amusing from my experience on the council. The issue has to do with the relationship. I mean, basically, if you put it down to just straight out factual, it is, where is the city manager going to sit?
Mm-hmm.
And we have in the council chamber, in the old council chamber, we had room for every member of the council, plus the city clerk, plus the city attorney, plus the city manager. And the city manager sat next to the mayor, and the mayor sat right square in the center of all of these things. We now move to a new council chamber, which I hope everybody will see. It's a beautiful and very functional space.
Good. And
it's on the first floor. There's no longer an issue of having to go up our slow elevator and with crowds and so forth. But that's another issue, actually. But there is room, actually, for what I just described, plus a couple of more council members in case the council is ever increased. But at the time that change was made, the idea was proposed that maybe the city manager ought to sit with the rest of the staff, and I suppose that includes the city attorney as well, and that the staff should sit over away from the council, and they'd be in a separate part, not up front like the council is. And I think the theory of that is that, well, the elected officials are the ultimate policymakers, and that the policymakers ought to be in one spot, and that the administration ought to be in another spot, because the administration doesn't answer directly to the people, but it answers to
works for the council.
Works for the council.
Yes.
And so, because they work for the council, they ought to be in a place that looks somewhat maybe inferior to the council in pecking order or something of that type. Well, of course, there is something to be said for that argument, and the school board has done that. They have taken it so that the administration now sits over to one side, and the school board sits up at.
That's right. It's a symbolic.
It's a symbolic thing. The other side of the coin is that, wait a minute, it's a team. You've got the elected officials who are sitting there. One of their charges is to hire a city manager.
Right.
The charge of the elected officials is to make policy. And then the city manager is supposed to carry out that policy. The city manager and the city staff is also there to advise the council. So they're not making policy, they're not voting, but the city manager is the spokesman for the entire staff and is the go-between between the elected officials and the staff. That's the way it's set up. Well, so you really have a team working together. You have the council, and then you have the person that the council has chosen to carry out these things. He's a member of that team.
Now, is that also a symbolic distinction, or is there a practical effect of say, moving the manager?
Well, there is a bit of a practical effect. It's not a huge consequence. But as mayor, it is very helpful for me to be able to turn to the city manager occasionally and talk to him about things a little bit, or to have him run the timer. Or
so you have kind of a private consultation sometimes?
Well, just a little bit. Now, we don't make any decisions.
Well, sure.
Or anything of that type. But there are times when it's helpful to say, do you have a staff report for this, or this kind of thing, where I can kind of keep up with things just slightly better by having the city manager there. So I find it useful. And to me, it's an issue that means something to some people who see it symbolically as a way of trying to make this great distinction. And in my case, it's more useful for me to have the city managers there. And so what the council has decided to do is say, oh, it'll be up to the mayor now to make their seating arrangements.
You've got all the power.
So that makes the mayor's office much more powerful, because
does.
he can say where the city manager is going to sit. So while I'm mayor, I've chosen to retain the city manager next to me, because I think it's useful. And I also kind of approve of the team approach, because I think it really works that way.
Have you made that public, or are we breaking news here tonight?
No, I think it's public.
Oh, okay.
Because when we made we informally said that's the way it worked, and I sort of informally made that decision before the very first meeting in the new chamber. Now, there is one change that I've asked to have made, and that is that if you look at the council now, and think of me, I'm facing out to the audience. So I'll talk about my right and left, or the opposite for the audience. All right. And so the way it is now, on my right-hand side, we have the first ward council person, second ward council person, the attorney, who gives very valuable advice and is often asked for legal advice about when we're trying to make policy.
During council meetings.
During council meetings. Then the city clerk, who reads the roll and reads the bills.
Right.
And so, and then on the other side, we have the city manager, and then the other council people. So we have 2 council people on my right, 4 council people on my left. Well, the 6th ward council members way down, and so she said, I'd like to be more in the middle of things, and I agree with that. And so next time we're going to move the 3rd ward council person over to my right, so there'll be 3 council people on each side.
I see. Well,
And I think that's better. That's an improvement. Now, others have suggested, it's really interesting how you get into these things, that maybe we ought to go by seniority. So you have the mayor, and then you would have the longest serving council people closest to the mayor. We do it now by the number of the wards.
sure.
And so that's a possible change. And I don't.
And all those options are available to the mayor. whether
Well,
it's you
they
or the
didn't
next
specifically say that in the resolution. The only thing they talked about was as I recall, that the mayor would determine where the city manager is going to sit.
I see.
But I think we can talk that over, and if people would prefer to have it set up by seniority, that's okay.
As this, you've served how many terms?
5.
5
I've
terms.
done 5 terms.
And this seating arrangement has been consistent through
It
those
has
5
never
terms?
changed the whole time I've
So
been there.
it's
The
just-
issue had never come up.
Right.
And so I'm happy the way it is. And I think it's kind of interesting that you have these two sides and people are arguing pretty hard about it. But my guess is that to most people, it makes no difference whatsoever in the community.
You may be right.
That it's one of those things that just, but you have some people who are really concerned about it, but there are two sides.
And there's not much harm in addressing their concerns.
No, nothing wrong with addressing their concerns, and so we can do it. And as I say, one thing that has happened is I think we're going to have a fairer and better seating arrangement for the members of the council.
And
that is one of the outcomes.
that's a positive.
And it may be that the seniority arrangement may be a better and fairer arrangement. I'm not sure that it is, but
Do you tend to, in the seniority arrangement, why does that make sense? Do you tend to get more discussion out of the senior members? Or is that just symbolic also?
Actually, you do get, at least at first you do. There's an argument, I think, both ways on that. Now, we also know that seniority is used in unions and airline pilots and these sorts of things. And the theory, at least on a lot of those, is that the more experience that you have, the more pay you're going to get because the better qualified you are.
How's
The
that
more
square with democracy, though?
Yeah, that's a good question. But when you're a newly elected council person, I can assure you that there's a big learning curve on your hands. So that the more senior members of the council will be able to contribute more, at least during the first part of any new term. Now, you look at Congress, where seniority is such a big thing. Does that really work or not? The problem with seniority often is that it doesn't necessarily reflect merit. The theory is that experience is of enough value that you can build a system around it, but that isn't always true in every case. Now then, on the council, if you said, all right, we're going to do it by seniority, then you're going to take the least experience and put them out on the fringe, where they're more isolated. And but then you do have a way, if the way it is now, the 1st and the 6th ward council people are always going to be on the fringe and be more isolated, and they don't have a chance to change. So there you are.
Yeah, interesting discussion.
Yeah.
Call with your questions, 876-7236. And we're going to continue on now with what happened at this just past council meeting Monday night.
Yeah.
The council passed an ordinance that was billed as a economic development bill for high-tech development. Has to do with the utilities and power, bringing power into the company for huge power users like the high-tech companies. My question is that just the cost to get in the game for high-tech? Does that give us an advantage?
I'm not sure that it gives us it depends what you mean by advantage. I don't think that it is a way of giving us a superior advantage over most other cities. I think what it does is it puts us on an even playing field, if that makes sense. In the high-tech business right now, you have these, I guess you call them, they're not call centers, I can't think of it, but you have these very large companies that put in these extraordinarily powerful computer centers where everything is brought together and all kinds of computer things.
Right, right.
And they demand a tremendous amount of power. And so they're going to compare power rates. That's one of the things that they're automatically going to do. And so if we don't have power rates that are comparable to other power rates, then we'd have no chance.
I guess we're competing for these companies not with Sedalia, but with Austin and Chapel Hill.
I think that's right. I think that we are, I've been arguing a long time on how we should go about our economic development. And I think everybody is in favor of economic development. I've always been in favor of economic development. But I have always felt that we have kind of been going about it the old-fashioned and wrong way. And I think we've changed on that. And we're doing some terrific, modern, up-to-date, winning things on economic development. And I'm proud of it. The only thing is, it's not the kind of thing you can see to. My argument has always been that, look, when it comes to going out for the traditional manufacturing, and there's nothing wrong with manufacturing, that you're competing with the rest of the world. Right. Everybody is trying to get that manufacturing. There's this theory that when you create something new, you bring in money from the outside instead of just exchanging it with the inside. And then, so manufacturing is really where you want to go. But the problem is that so much manufacturing, traditional manufacturing, is based on the low cost. And low cost is a very difficult thing to compete with. And you got to be really careful about competing for low cost, because you're likely to give up those things that you live for in order to get the low cost manufacturing. You might take money away from your schools. You might take money away from your parks or your recreation.
And other
all
incentives.
Those things. And then you bring in, they come because it's low cost, and they're only going to stay as long as it's low cost, and off they go somewhere else. Well, on the other hand, we've got here 3 educational institutions, higher education. We've got the Moberly Area Community College for training. And we've got our, I want to say job center, it's the school system operates.
Oh, sure, right. Their tech school.
Yeah, tech school.
Right.
It's a fantastic place.
That's right.
I'm sorry, can't think of it right at the moment. Somebody call in and get me straightened out on that.
Please.
Yes, help me. And the Career Center. Career Center.
Yes.
But we have the University of Missouri, which is of extreme importance because it is a research institution. There are people there at the University of Missouri who are coming up with brilliant ideas, and they're going into research on those ideas. And a lot of those ideas can be commercialized, and they can become businesses right here in Columbia, Missouri. And they might be the next Google of the world. You never can tell exactly what they would be.
Well, what's the city's role in bringing those ideas to commercialization?
Okay, the city's role is somewhat indirect with respect to that. But my theory is that the university has these people who come here. We educate those people. A lot of them have entrepreneurial spirit. Others just have ideas that others with entrepreneurial spirit can take and run with. Those ideas are going to be developed somewhere, and they ought to be developed here. And how do you get them developed here? You get these people to stay here, choose to be in Columbia, Missouri, and say, this is where I want to raise my family. This is where I want to put my kids in school. This is where I want to live. Because I could go to Berkeley, I could go to Boston, I could go any of these places. and I want to stay in Columbia, Missouri. So I argue over and over again that what we put into making Columbia the best possible place to live is one of the most important economic development strategies and investments we can make. And if those people stay here and say, I am going to stay here and I'm going to start my business, or I'm going to see to it that my idea is developed into a business here in Columbia, then that means you got to bring more people in to get that accomplished. Mm-hmm. And you start building up this critical mass of people. And that's what it takes. They've shown over and over again that to be a big part of this knowledge-based economy that we're talking about, you got to have a critical mass of those people who are interested in that knowledge-based economy. And you get that by having them stay here, attracting others from the outside, and you do that by having a great arts community, by having a beautiful community, by having parks, trails, a wonderful downtown, a reasonable cost of living, and great schools. Absolutely fundamental to this is great schools.
Right.
And then we got the research university. We as a city could never build a research university.
That's true.
Got it. And we've got the largest research nuclear reactor in the country. We've got a university that has a veterinary school, a medical school, a business school, a law school, an engineering school.
So we've got all the inventory to
We've got
really
it
make.
all, and we got to get those people to stay here.
Well, you've been a long time proponent of parks, trails, amenities that make the quality of life in Columbia.
Yeah, but they're not amenities.
Special. Well, they're
Are
services.
economic development
Well, that's
investments.
I tend to agree with you.
All right. But now then,
Some people don't. Though.
Of course they don't.
And they are proponents of giving incentives to businesses, to manufacturers.
Now, incentives in this day and age, I've always been a skeptic of incentives because, first of all, I wonder how good public policy it is to have incentives where the one part of the country is competing with another part of the country by just handing out public money to private.
It's an arms war.
It's an arms war. The other side of the coin is that incentives are part of it today. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's face it, you're going to have incentives. So my test is, let's take a look and say, if you do this, is it going to be a net positive for your community? Mm-hmm. Because when you give incentives, most of the time you give incentives, this isn't always the case, but most of the time you give incentives, you're taking away from something else to invest in this.
Well, isn't the idea, though, behind incentives, isn't there always an assumption that there'll be a net gain by giving
there has to be a
something
net
away?
gain. That's it. But that isn't always true.
Right.
But a lot of times there is. Now then, when it came to what the council did at the last meeting, I think there is a huge net gain. And here's what they're talking about. They're talking about bringing in large facilities operated by the very largest and finest, most progressive corporations
The Googles
in the country.
of the world.
Right. That will bring into this community many, many high-paying jobs. They'll bring into this community people who are part of that creative, critical mass that we need, mm-hmm. and that will interact with the university and university research. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is a really smart investment on our part. And let's take a look at the investment we're talking about. We operate our own utility system.
Right.
And that's in our charter. And our utility system, and people need to understand this, according to the charter, It's something that we got to keep unless we have a 2/3 majority say that we would sell any part of it or discontinue any part of it. That's in our charter. So it's ingrained. This is a very important part. The next thing is, it's not there to make a profit for the community. It's there to sell electricity at reasonable rates and encourage
It's a service for the
economics, encourage economic development and so forth. The only thing that we get out for our general fund out of it is a payment in lieu of tax that is exactly equal to what a private utility providing the same utility services would pay. And so we can't go to that utility and say, well, we want to build streets or something with your profits. We can't do that under our charter. All right, so what we're talking about now is saying, all right, if you have a user that uses massive amounts of power.
More than anybody in town uses right now.
More than many times what anybody uses in town right now that's on our system. Then we will act as a pass-through for that. We will not charge more than it costs us to acquire that power. We're not going to be able to generate that power, but we'll go out and acquire that power, and it will run right through our system, but it will be a pass-through. So we're neither making nor losing anything out of it. When it comes to the payment in lieu of tax, we're saying, okay, we're going to have that, but we're going to take 50% of that and put it into infrastructure that goes into this economic development project if it comes our way.
Into a specific project.
Right.
Okay.
And so that fits within the charter purpose of the utility. And so now then, that means that these concerns can take a look at Columbia, and they can say, we don't have to worry about the power costs because they're fair. All right? Will be now they can look at the strengths that Columbia has, and then they can say, wow, we'd like for our people to live in Columbia.
Now, do we have the infrastructure to accept the capacity to accept that energy now?
We, as you, actually, we've got our power system. There is a backup from the REA power system, backup from Ameren power system. We've got access to the grid from 2 different directions and can put in a third. And of course, reliability is extremely important to these organizations. If one of these things shut down, I can't imagine what it would do. If, say it was Google, and Google shut down because of power failure,
the whole world would stop.
You'd think the whole world would stop, right? And you and I were busy trying to find something on there. We'd be all upset, right? So anyway, I think this is a very progressive, fair thing to do. And that comes from somebody who, then I want economic development, but I want it to be a positive.
Right.
And so I've always been a little bit skeptical about proposals to do these incentives, but I'm convinced that at the right time, right place.
This was really a no-lose.
This is a no-lose proposition.
Right.
And I'll tell you, there are some really smart people here in Columbia who have worked on these things. I like to give Dave Griggs a lot of of credit. He has researched this. He's smart. He's an active business person, as everybody knows. He's been an elected official, so he understands things in the morning.
County Commission. And he's a real proponent of economic incentives.
And maybe every once in a while I won't agree with him on all points, but he makes the case very well, and I think he recognizes that there are people like me out there, and there are people a lot more skeptical than I am. So I think that the net result of all of this has been that we have a really progressive, well thought out economic incentive program for Columbia.
Good. If you have questions for Mayor Hyman, call 876-7236. And we're going to move on a little bit to in the same vein, I think a little different direction. The council, a lot of people or commenters, let's say, I don't know whether it's a lot or a few loud people.
Now, that's one of the big problems, of course, all elected officials have, is we don't know what the count is on these things.
That's right, but we've all heard people say that we invest in parks and trails at the expense, or implication is, at the expense of jobs, of economic development. Now, beyond incentives, what is the council doing and what can the council do to promote job growth?
Well, I think that, I tried to make this point before, I think that the most important thing we can do to promote job growth in Columbia is to invest in our city. And I'll start with schools. I think that when it comes time to bring the people here who are going to create the jobs, and that's what you're trying to do, is create jobs. And create the new jobs, the sustainable jobs. We want jobs that are going to start here and stay here.
Right.
All right? And to get the people who are going to do those things for your community, the first question they're going to ask is about the schools.
Right.
And so, number one, you've got to invest in your schools. We've got one of the most important economic development decisions coming before the people of Columbia in April that they're going to make in a long time, and that's the school bond issue.
Big bond issue.
It's a big bond issue. It is, and it's a multifaceted thing, but we're talking about economic development right now. It is an extremely important economic development investment. All right. If we don't pass that bond issue, and Google says, I'm thinking about coming to Columbia, do you support your schools? Well, the last two bond issues failed. They'll probably say, well, let's take a look at Lawrence, Kansas. So
that makes sense.
So that's extremely, extremely important. Now then, what else should we be doing? Well, we're doing some very direct things, but I think that we need to continue to make our downtown a place that almost no other city has.
Right.
And we're working on that. We're going to start getting apartments downtown. We're going to start getting people living downtown. I hope we'll get more services like grocery stores and things like that in the downtown area. We'll get more restaurants, more sidewalk cafes. We'll fill up those at-surface parking lots with buildings and stores and activity. People love that. They say it over and over again. I'd like to live in Columbia because of that downtown. We need to have a non-motorized transportation system where people can have a choice on the way they want to travel. They want to have good health. They want to have the opportunity to choose to ride their bikes or walk or drive their car or take the bus. That's part of what life is all about. They want parks. We have a policy of a park within a half a mile of every residence in the city of Columbia. And it should be something you get to by walking or bicycling or whatever. In the neighborhood parks, you ought to be able to get there that way. And we need to have an arts community. The people you want, they're going to create the jobs, they're going to want to stay here, are creative people. Right. And they want this. Those are economic development investments. Now then, there are other things you want to do. You want to make it easy for people who say, okay, Columbia's the place I want to be. Now then, I've got to make my decision pretty quickly, though. I got to have a building, or I've got to have a place I can build my building and get it done. So I think you need to have some what we call shovel-ready sites.
That's a buzzword.
That's a buzzword. And so the people come to Columbia and they say, wow, this is where we want to be. Now, are we going to have to go through all kinds of permitting and all these different things and zoning issues and not know whether we're going to get it and this kind of thing? And so we need to be able to say, no, you don't have to do that. Here are some shovel-ready sites. Here are some industrial zone places, and no zoning change is required, and so on and so forth. And we're doing that. And
I've heard certain developers say, who I respect, say that I respect all developers, by the way.
well, sure, it's a
but
risky.
The friends of
important
mine who are developers have said Columbia is one of the worst places to get your permits, to get everything you need to start a project in the country.
You know what? That's not true. I'll just tell them that right off the bat.
Okay.
I think most of them don't know because they haven't tried it anywhere else.
Well, that could be, but these people,
Yeah.
I know people who have.
Okay.
but-
Well, and I know people who have too, and they say that's not true.
Yeah.
And I don't think it is true.
Is there anything that Columbia should do to improve that process?
I'm sure that everybody, no matter who you are, can improve something. And so we should look the process over. But let's face it, one of the reasons that you have to go through these things is that the citizens of Columbia are very protective of their city. And they've seen things that developers have done that they don't like, right? And when developers do things that people don't like, then they want protection against that.
The famous Forum Boulevard.
We can pick out several.
Right.
Okay. And so the developers oftentimes have brought on to themselves the things that they have to face. I think that Columbia's requirements are probably pretty darn good for the community. And the fact that the developers sometimes have to jump through some hoops that they'd rather not jump through is probably
fine.
not bad. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't places where we could improve and be fair or whatever it might be. But I think overall, I think we probably do a great job. Now, I think some of the criticism comes from times when we had massive input of trying to get new development during the peak,
boom
the bubble,
years, that's
you
right.
might call it. And we were probably understaffed at that point relative to that. And so they might have had to wait more than they would like to have waited and so on. So then you get back, well, should a city be staffed up for the peak? Well, really, you can't be. If we
Right.
were staffed up for the peak, then now we're at a low part, we'd have engineers sitting around
Sure.
throwing pennies at lines on the sidewalk, right? And so you have to make decisions. It's like the snow. You can only buy so many plows because if you overbuy for the plows, they're going to be sitting there most of the time.
Right.
If you so if you're there and you plow up that snow that comes once every 100 years, but you have the plow sitting there 99 years unused, then that's so. Peaks are always a problem, but I basically think that our requirements are
What about
probably
our
reasonable.
Zoning codes, is zoning adequate? Does it
I
need to
think
be
our
revisited?
zoning codes are out of date.
Is that a project that will come up soon, you think?
Yes, I think it will. And if you know, I've chosen not to run, but one of the things I would have enjoyed doing would have been serving as mayor during the time that we work on modernizing our zoning codes. I think we made a lot of progress, and probably in some cases to the criticism of some of the developers and some of the things that have needed to be done. For example, stormwater. And the stormwater requirements are much greater than they used to be.
Right.
And they are a burden on the developers, and they require getting approval for things that they didn't have to get approval for before.
Right.
But I'll tell you, there have been some awful cases where people who built a house then find they're getting flooded due to the development upstream from,
runoff.
and it's just been awful.
And there have been
And
some federal rules that
The
we've
federal
had to
rules
adopt.
have helped us, but it's been, it really helps to have those federal rules because you can only come up with so much initiative, I think, on the local level without being able to point to federal rules to help you. But overall, I think the federal rules have been good, very good. And we have made, but our city, our citizenship is very concerned about such things as the environment and the quality of our building and so forth, the beauty of our city. And so, but there's more to be done in connection with land clearance, land disturbance. Right now, we have a lot of land disturbance to build, say you build a shopping center, just kind of go in there and flatten everything.
That's right.
And
Although we have tree ordinances that
we have tree
prevent-
ordinances, and every time we think we've got that one pretty well under control, somebody comes up with a bright idea that causes a bunch of problems. But I think that on land disturbance, we need to talk more about requiring the building to fit the land more as it is instead of changing the land completely to fit.
Now, is there precedent for that in
Oh
other
yes,
communities?
oh yes, and but it is another burden on the developer. But it ends up with a much better city. So there you are. And then this is another thing to think about. You're comparing Chile with Haiti.
Right.
And Chile had a, what was it, 9 point something earthquake? Or maybe 8.8.
8.8, I believe, yeah.
And in Haiti they had one that was
7.6.
and 200 and some thousand people lost their lives in Haiti.
That's right.
Maybe 1,000 or so lost their lives in Chile.
That's right.
And
Fewer than 1,000 right now.
what is the difference? Building codes.
Infrastructure, right.
Building codes. And so, wait a minute, there's a reason for these things. And so,
So, yeah, the Chilean developers might have complained about
I'll
their
bet they
building
did.
codes back in the
Yeah.
after 60s.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, but you can go too far. But so it's one of those things where you try and work it out. But I'm going to defend Columbia on its rules and regulations, and I would like to see some changes in the zoning code that allow the developers more flexibility than they have today. Instead of having all of these very segmented sections of town, have a far greater mixture, but have some pretty high standards as to what that mixture is going to be like.
Okay. I want to go back to a couple of points that you touched on when you were talking about the services and the things that Columbia offers. The parking garage that is under construction now that will have the retail level on the first level. The retail space was not
No, it didn't.
wasn't snapped up.
It wasn't snapped up. As a matter of fact, we put out, there was criticism of the government going in and competing with the private sector.
That's right. Or retail rental space.
Retail rental space. So we said, okay, we'll turn it over to the private sector to do. And so we sent out a request for proposals, RFP, for private sector operators to come in and say, we'll take over this retail space and then we'll lease it out. We'll take the risks as though we were the owners. Nobody. Nobody bid. And so
Timing, do you think? Was it-
probably timing, but it does show that probably that is not much of a competitive threat to the rest of downtown. But an interesting thing about it is that the downtown merchants through the SBD had asked us to do that because the theory of downtown is that you want to have as much activity as you can. And having retail space downtown provides that activity. A parking garage is dead space, just like our surface parking lots are dead space. So the idea was if you're going to build a parking garage, which should be dead space, let's put an activity level on the ground floor so that that block will be an active block.
Right.
Well, maybe it's the timing. Well, we're looking now at putting a business incubator and some other things in there. And so there are people who want to start small businesses. They might not be high-tech businesses based on university research, but maybe young students or somebody who've come up with some way of
I see.
creating their own idea.
Right.
And so, and then we'd have an office there that would work with those people in the downtown area. So we're looking at that right now.
Now, is that going to require creating an office to
Oh yeah,
work
we'll
with
create
those?
offices and it'll create traffic.
And also create city positions to help?
No, probably not.
Okay.
Probably not.
You can do that with existing offices, city offices.
Well, I think that, again, we would be leasing it out to operators of this sort of thing.
I see. Right. Right. And another thing that I wanted to ask you about was, you mentioned the bus system. That's one of the things that people expect from a city that find attractive public transportation, including bus system. Our bus system, critics say that it doesn't run long enough during the day. It doesn't go enough places. It's just not convenient to ride the bus. And I just wonder if we can afford, if Columbia can afford a bus system that is more universal, more user friendly.
That the critics are absolutely correct that the bus system runs too infrequently, misses parts of town that need bus service, doesn't run enough hours, doesn't run on the weekends. They're correct about that. The other side of the coin is that it's very, very expensive to run a bus system. We would not be able to run our bus system without all kinds of federal help. The federal government basically buys our buses for us. And then we have a transportation sales tax where we divide it between streets and roads and sidewalks and bus system, airport. And so we take what we think as much as we can from that to run the bus system. We have been gaining ground. We had our 2 millionth rider last year, so that's a big
Milestone.
milestone for us. We are making progress. There has been a committee formed. Barbara Hoppe recommended this, and I think she, it's like so many other good ideas, a very simple idea that somebody should have come up with a long time ago. But she suggested we have a Citizens Advisory Committee on public transportation. I wholeheartedly agree with that. The council made the appointments at the last council meeting, so this is brand new. I think that when you take the minds, which includes various critics, various creative people that are on that, various users on that, they can take a look at all of these issues. What it costs, what it would cost to extend, where would the money come from to do that? But we need to look at that.
Are municipal, can they be self-sustaining? Is it a function of
I don't
population
think they can
size?
I don't think they can be self-sustaining. The money's got to come from somewhere. Soon after I was elected mayor, I went to Korea to visit our sister city in Korea. Met the mayor. The mayor took me aside and said, "I got a question for you. Tell me about your bus system." That doesn't pay its way.
And that was probably a much larger city, too.
It was a larger city and in an area where more people depended on public transportation than depend on it here. Washington, D.C. You go to Washington, D.C., they got this incredible bus
Great
system.
public transportation
Great public
system.
transportation system. It's losing money hand over fist. And they're getting ready to raise the rates again, and they're just they're having an awful time trying to free. And it's got all these trains that are just thousands. It carries.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know what
The city would be paralyzed without
it'd be
that
paralyzed
system.
without. They got to have it. And so there are some places in North Carolina. It's I can't think of the name of it. But anyway, they have a system where the university students pay into a fund that allows them to ride the bus system free. So every university student then pays maybe $50 a
It's an activity fee kind
It's
of
basically
thing.
an activity. All that goes into the bus system. And then the city puts money into it and so on. And they are able to provide, it may be free transportation for everybody in these cities. They got an intercity system, and only one city actually has the free transportation, I think. And so, but the point is somebody is paying for it. Right. And so we're trying to look at ideas like that. We have situations where we have student apartment complexes. One of the things you've got to have to make a public transportation system work well is high density of your destinations. Very high density of where people live. So you can get lots of passengers at that one stop.
Right.
And then high density at the other end, where everybody works in maybe a working zone. And so we've got that with the university and with those high-density student apartments out on old Highway 63. Right. And so we run a bus back and forth. Now, the apartment complexes have helped us by buying a bus for us. But we run that bus, and we do very well out of that.
Now, do students pay for that by the ride, or?
You know, I don't honestly know whether they pay by the ride or whether they pay it in their rent. But anyway, we get it. We get the money, and that has heavily increased our ridership. It's increased those routes, depending on how you amortize. Somebody had to pay for the bus,
right?
But those routes work. You take the rest of Columbia; it's hard to find that kind of density.
Sure.
And so that means you have to run your buses significant distances and stop often and not pick up too many passengers. And that makes it really expensive.
Before we run out of time, I wanted to ask you about one other issue. We've just got about 5 minutes left.
Well, we've really chatted away,
it up,
and nobody has called us. What's going on?
Well, we've answered all their questions,
I guess
I'm
that's
sure.
it, to their complete satisfaction.
The parks tax is going to expire next spring, 2011. Will likely be on the ballot in August, or possibly on the ballot in this August.
August, maybe November.
Maybe November. I know that's a subject that's dear to your heart.
Absolutely.
And will you be working on that issue after you leave office next month?
Well, I don't know. I think it kind of depends on a lot of things. If I'm asked, I would certainly have to be tempted to think about it because it is so dear to my heart. And I think that parks tax, again, is an incredible economic development investment. I have a theory about what municipal government is all about, and that is it is to help people have as satisfactory a life as possible, as many people. And I'm firmly convinced that parks and trails and the arts are among the most successful things that governments can do along that line. And so to me, some people say, well, parks are an amenity. I don't agree. I think that they are fundamental to the purpose of government.
Right.
And so, but we've done surveys in the past, and surveys have shown that the people of Columbia are very environmentally sensitive, that they are very proud of their parks and their trails, and that they want to support them. And so I think it's absolutely important that we do that. There are going to be some interesting things coming up because, and I've very much favored this, but we're having what we call a natural resources inventory. And that's a high-tech thing that the City of Columbia is a national leader on. People probably don't appreciate this too much, where we had a very high-resolution flyover made of the City of Columbia. And we're using the University of Missouri, which is an absolute leader in this field nationwide, does all kinds of work for the Defense Department and Homeland Security and for CIA in interpreting these kinds of things. Taking these things and telling us where we've got vacant land, what's on that vacant land, how our land is zoned, what kind of trees are there. They can even identify the trees, their age and everything else. And we're going to have a natural resources inventory where we can say, here's a piece of property that we think the city ought to own to preserve. Here's a piece of property that ought to be developed, and so on and so forth. We can make some really intelligent decisions. And so I think that's going to be part of the mix when we go for this parks sales tax.
Right. Well, Mayor, I've got to say that everyone in Columbia has to appreciate the time you've put in, the effort you've put in representing this city over the last, what, 6 terms?
5 terms. 5 terms, right.
Couldn't get a 6th one in.
Well, you know, I think I could have been really at least competitive.
I don't doubt it. I don't
but
doubt it.
I just decided the time had come.
Well, we wish you well.
Well, thank you.
I'm sure we haven't seen the last of you.
Well, I plan to do the rest of my life here in Columbia. So.
Well, I'm Jim Robertson. I'm managing editor at the Columbia Daily Tribune. I'm pleased to be your host tonight for Ask Darwin, and my guest, Darwin Hyman, the mayor of Columbia.
Well, it's been a great pleasure to have you here, Jim, and you did a great job. So.
Thank you. It was fun.
Here you go.